After being reborn, I finally decided to let Victoria go. If she wanted to dedicate herself to scientific research, I would head into the mountains to teach. If she cherished her little assistant by her side, I would cancel our engagement. In my previous life, I trapped her with family and responsibility. She and Ethan spent a lifetime as unacknowledged lovers. It wasn't until she fell ill and passed away that I realized I had wasted my own life as well. After being reborn, I immediately signed up for teaching in a remote area. The moment I received the transfer notice, I felt like I had been given a new lease on life. The leader who had been advising me all along said with relief, "Among the teachers of your cohort, I had the most faith in you. You used to say your fiancé worked in the city and was unwilling to leave. This time, you finally made up your mind." Speaking of Victoria, she was a prodigy, not just with a good family background, but also a shining career. She was now a key figure in a research institute, with a career on the rise. As for me, aside from having a stable job, I was very ordinary in other aspects. If it weren't for the engagement arranged in our childhood, there would have been no connection between us. With determination in my eyes, I said, "Leader, I want to try doing something meaningful." The leader patted me on the shoulder and said, "The place where you will be teaching is quite tough. You need to be mentally prepared. No hardship could compare to the suffering of my previous life. In my previous life, I hesitated and ultimately did not go to teach in the mountains, which became a lifelong regret. The Victoria family pressured us to get married. 1 month after the wedding, Victoria became pregnant. She didn't want to have the child, saying it would affect the progress of her research projects. But I yearned for a complete family, so I took on all the household affairs myself. From then on, I was trapped in domestic chores, and Victoria rarely came home. She was busy with experiments, publishing papers, and making significant progress in her projects. Ethan always accompanied her as an assistant, taking care of both her work and personal life. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home, raising our son and caring for the elders. I believed my son respected me as his father until I saw him getting engaged to Ethan's niece. In the private room, he smiled brightly at Ethan and unhesitatingly called him, "Dad, have some tea." He only informed me of the wedding at the last minute. When I questioned him, he impatiently replied, "Dad, Mom and Uncle Ethan's work is important and great. If you don't want to improve yourself, don't drag them down." He also said, "You can't be so greedy. You've got the title. Do you want Mom's heart too? With your education, do you even have a common language with her?" He believed that only Victoria was trapped by the family, and I deserved to be the sacrificial lamb of the marriage. But why? When we were young, I had asked for her opinion, and she agreed to the engagement arranged by our elders. For that, I gave up my true career aspirations. Her research tasks were demanding, but I also worked tirelessly to care for the family. While she was on business trips, I managed all the household needs. During the toughest times, I juggled between home and school, running around the clock to take care of the elders' needs. When it was time for retirement, she had risen to become a prominent figure in the scientific community, while I was confined to the limited world of the school, withering in knowledge and experience. People said I was no longer worthy of her and advised me to leave gracefully. Even my son, whom I had raised single-handedly, thought Ethan should stand by her side. But I refused. After our last argument, my son left me in a nursing home and walked away. On my deathbed, I was utterly alone, filled with deep regret. If there were a next life, I swore I would never give up my own life again. Back at the apartment, I carefully put away the acceptance letter. A honey cake was gradually taking shape under my hands. This was the Victoria family home, convenient for my work, where Victoria and I lived together. The calendar in the living room had a big red circle, signaling that in half a month, I could leave and start living the life I had always wanted. Just after drawing the red circle, Victoria came back with Ethan and his niece. Seeing me open the door, Ethan gave a seemingly cheerful smile and said, "Sincere, Victoria invited me up. Sorry to trouble you again." The little girl, familiar with the place, followed the sweet scent into the kitchen, grabbed the dessert from the baking tray and divided it into 3 portions. completely forgetting about mine. When I came out of the kitchen, the three of them were chatting and laughing with their heads together. As soon as they took a bite of the cake, they spat it out simultaneously, exclaiming, "Uncle, it's so bitter." I stood still while Victoria bustled around, handing out tissues and teacups. Finally, Ethan forced a smile and left. His usual dimples were absent, though he still spoke generously. "Victoria, Sincere's skills have room for improvement. You two should avoid arguing." Victoria said nothing as she saw him out. When she returned, I brought out another tray of cake and quietly enjoyed it. Victoria hesitated before explaining, "Molly is the orphan daughter of my sister. Before she passed away, she repeatedly asked me to take good care of Ethan. Since you make delicious desserts, I let the child come up to try them." I remained silent. She awkwardly added, "If you mind so much, I'll call them less frequently from now on." The next morning I started packing, preparing to visit the nearby city in a couple of days. Since I had already decided to break off the engagement, it was best to make things clear as soon as possible, out of respect, and to avoid future complications. When sorting through my belongings, I came across a pair of clay dolls that Victoria had given me when we were kids. Back then, with her chubby little hands covered in mud, she had promised, "Sin, my mom says you'll be my husband when we grow up, so I'm giving this to you." The dolls ended up in my suitcase. I didn't want the dolls anymore, and I didn't want her either. I stood up and drew a big cross on the calendar in the living room. In 14 days, I would be leaving this place. That night, Victoria came back very late. She glanced nonchalantly at the food on the table and said, "I've already eaten." The woman who had sneaked food didn't even bother to wipe the corners of her mouth. After the last time she knew bringing Ethan home would anger me, she simply ate out. Fortunately, I hadn't cooked for her either. After dinner, I went back to my room to organize some documents and make final preparations before the new semester began. Victoria appeared silently behind me. I closed my laptop and asked, "What's up?" She hesitated for a moment before saying, "I've contacted the wedding planner and the hotel. How about setting the date for September 1st? She really knew how to pick a date. It was the first day of school. I looked at her for 3 seconds before she averted her gaze. In our past life, she had handled our relationship, dating, marriage, having children, supporting the family like a business transaction. To outsiders, she seemed perfect, but only I felt her detachment and coldness. It wasn't until my deathbed that I realized she had probably been dissatisfied with our marriage from the start. Yet, I was the only one who withered in that marriage. So I asked her, "Victoria, have you really thought this through?" She was taken aback, not expecting the question. Then, just like in our past life, she answered, "Sincere, you're the only husband I recognize." This time, I didn't hesitate. I said, "Marriage is a big deal. We should discuss it with our parents. There's no rush to set the date." She seemed relieved and quickly changed the subject. "It's so late and you're still preparing lesson plans? Don't overwork yourself." Those were lesson plans for the kids in the mountains. This time I was choosing the road I hadn't chosen before. I wanted to see how wonderfully I could live without Victoria. On the third day, Victoria got up early. When I got up, there was a bowl of crab wontons from the South City on the table, my favorite. It was rare for her to try to please me, so I waited for her next move. Sure enough, she awkwardly said, "Sincere, I can't go with you to visit your parents this time. Molly is sick and Ethan can't handle it alone." Only then did I start eating. I hadn't even thought of an excuse to keep her from coming, and this worked out perfectly for both of us. Seeing me nod in agreement, Victoria hurriedly left. Today, I was going home to call off the engagement. Victoria's parents had always treated me well, so breaking off the engagement shouldn't be too difficult. I just needed to tell them that Victoria's future was bright, and we were not suitable for each other. Their living room was quiet and heavy. I sat silently, turning the teacup in my hand. Kathy tried to speak several times, but swallowed her words. She had heard plenty about Ethan over the years. Finally, she said, "Even if she has feelings for Ethan, you two are still engaged. If she dares to back out, I'll deal with her myself." It was Will who made the final decision. Since you're proposing to break off the engagement, we respect your decision. But Sincere, our family's relationship won't change. We'll still consider you one of our closest juniors. Victoria was now highly sought after, so even her own parents couldn't understand why I was determined to break off the engagement. However, I knew they probably had some secret expectations for this marriage. By proposing to end it, I was being considerate. This was good. For the rest of my life, I didn't want any more entanglements with Victoria or her family. After all, they were still family. The engagement was called off. To prevent any complications, I lied and said Victoria was too busy and had asked me to come alone. Kathy felt genuinely guilty and urged me to stay for a while. I didn't want to go back to that small apartment and face Victoria every day. So I stayed at their place for 10 days. During those 10 days, Victoria only called once. After hearing I was at their place, she didn't call again. She remained as businesslike and detached as ever about our relationship. When I returned, the first thing I did was mark 10 big red crosses on the calendar. Only 4 days left. Just 4 days. As I was carrying my luggage back home, I heard the door open. Victoria stood outside, followed closely by Ethan and Molly. Victoria looked surprised and asked, "You're back?" Ethan and Molly walked straight into my room. I frowned as Ethan naturally closed the door behind him. The living room was a mess, and upon closer inspection I realized all my things were scattered around. I looked at Victoria. She seemed a bit embarrassed and explained, "Ethan's place had a leak from the heavy rain a few days ago, so they're staying here for a couple of days. I saw you weren't around and didn't have many things, so I let them use your room temporarily." I hadn't even told her about calling off the engagement, and they were already so blatant. Facing my cold gaze, Victoria said, as if bestowing a favor, "You can move into my room and sleep there for now." She opened her room door and asked, "By the way, where are all your books? Why are there so few?" The belongings were, of course, moved out. However, I calmly explained that I had sold them because I was planning to get married and focus more on family life. Many things would no longer be necessary. Victoria frowned and said, "Even after getting married, you might still need them. Self-improvement is important at any time, but fine, if you want to sell, go ahead." She had known everything all along but didn't care. She watched as I was consumed by that family, basking in the benefits as if it were nothing. However, she shouldn't enjoy my contributions on one hand while her heart wavered toward Ethan on the other. I pressed my lips together and said nothing. Seeing my silence, she finally asked, "By the way, what did Dad and Mom say?" Victoria took the bundle from my hands. I paused and said, "I consulted someone about the date and it's not a good time. We should discuss it later. Anyway, there are still 4 days left." I intended to use this excuse to buy some time, explaining everything to her before I left. Victoria sighed with relief, then gave a somewhat forced smile. She glanced at the calendar in the living room and said, "Looks like we need to find another good day." Then she ran off to the kitchen to cook. She didn't pay any attention to what I was drawing. I glanced at the household registration book on my desk. When I came back to my senses and wanted to help, I heard the faint voices of 3 people outside. A man's deep voice, a woman's charming tone, and a child's innocent chatter. I sat back down silently. Indeed, it was inappropriate for us to live together after our engagement was called off, especially in the same house. But with only 4 days left, finding a suitable place to rent was impossible. I thought for a moment and decided that after dinner, I would sleep in the living room. The next morning, before I could fully wake up, Molly was already causing a ruckus in the living room. Ethan, instead of stopping her, was making a racket in the kitchen. Victoria just sat on the couch, smiling as she watched them. This must be the image of a family of 3 she had in her mind. I excused myself, saying I was going grocery shopping, and hurried out. As soon as I stepped out, I took a deep breath. Neighbor Red saw me and came over, teasingly asking, "Sincere, why are you back? Weren't you supposed to visit your in-laws?" I replied, "They're not my in-laws." Red was momentarily stunned, but then laughed. Thinking I was trying to protect Victoria's reputation, She said, "Right, they're not your in-laws yet. You have to get married first before calling them that." Seeing my lack of the usual humor, Red hesitated but couldn't help herself. She quietly scolded me. "Little Victoria brought a man home while you were away. I asked her about it, and she said you agreed. That man doesn't look trustworthy, and yet you gave your approval. You haven't even married yet, silly boy. Be more vigilant. If Victoria wasn't engaged to you, I'd introduce my nephew to her. Who wouldn't be interested in her? One man after another is trying to get close to her. Wake up." Even though there were many men, the one standing by Victoria's side was always Ethan. He didn't need to be overly cautious because Victoria had his back. I was just surprised that she claimed I had agreed, afraid that even a speck of dirt would touch Ethan. She really put a lot of effort into it. But there were things I couldn't say yet. Seeing my soft nature, Red pursed her lips and repeatedly reminded me to be more careful at home. When I returned, the living room was empty, but I heard rustling sounds from the basement. After a while, Molly came bouncing up, holding a torn, stained piece of paper. I realized it was the portrait I had drawn of Victoria last New Year's Day. The woman in the drawing still had a cold expression, but there was a faint smile on her lips. The room was warm like spring and fireworks were dazzling outside. During those hours, Victoria's eyes were only on me. I had thought our married life would be filled with such simple happiness, but that was the only time she had ever looked at me sincerely. The drawing was now tattered and sticky with candy residue. Ethan came up behind Molly saying, "Kids don't know any better, Sincere. You won't hold it against her, will you?" Though his tone was gentle, the pride and disdain in his eyes were clear. I replied indifferently, "If you know she doesn't understand, then educate her." Ethan seemed taken aback by my retort. Molly, sensing the tension, rushed over and slapped a dirty handprint on my shirt, shouting, "You can't bully my uncle." Her voice was shrill and piercing. Victoria rushed in from outside, pulling Molly into her arms. Ignoring her, I turned my attention to the fallen drawing. Victoria followed my gaze and understood immediately. She wanted to say something but swallowed her words. Ethan looked even more smug, yet feigned remorse, saying, "Victoria, I'm sorry. It's my fault for not watching Molly." My laughter suddenly broke the awkward silence. All three of them looked at me. I picked up the drawing and held it to the light, saying, "I didn't draw it right. The room's light wasn't this bright." With that, I threw the drawing into the trash and walked into the kitchen without any expression. Victoria looked up at me, stunned, forgetting about Molly's cries. She followed me into the kitchen, hesitating for a long time before finally speaking awkwardly. I was in a rush to find a new place to stay. In a couple of days, Eth would be moving out with Molly. I knew you didn't like him. Could you bear with it a bit longer? Without thinking, I nodded and said, "Sure, I'll be leaving in 3 days anyway. The house originally belonged to the Williams family, so whatever they decide to do behind closed doors after that won't concern me." I agreed so quickly that Victoria's words got stuck in her throat. Her face turned pale, and she looked very uncomfortable. She thought I was angry about what happened earlier. She sighed and pulled me back, saying, "Molly is still just a child. I've told you many times I take care of them because of my sister's request. Eth has it hard too. Could you stop thinking of people as so vile?" I sneered and said, "So you brought him back and said it was my idea?" Victoria's breath caught, and she opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. I laughed. "See, no matter how grandiose your words, you can't deceive yourself about the turmoil and filth in your heart. Out of respect for the elders, I won't ruin your career, but that's the extent of my tolerance." The next morning, I got up early. Yesterday's incident with Molly reminded me that there might still be some of my things in the basement. While they were still asleep, I went to the basement to pack. I had lived in this house for years, and despite preparing for 10 days, there were still many things left behind. I packed carefully. I didn't want to have any more ties with Victoria for the rest of my life. Since I decided to leave, I had to leave completely. After collecting everything, I ended up with 3 large bags. When I opened the door, I saw Victoria had already made breakfast. Seeing the things in my hands, she was taken aback and asked, "Where are you taking these?" I replied flatly, To the trash. There's too much useless stuff. Victoria glanced at it and then turned to knock on the door next to us. Eth, wake up with Molly. Breakfast is ready. At the table, Molly hummed as soon as she saw me and moved the breakfast closer to herself and Ethan. Victoria came out with fried eggs, smiled at me and said, "You're up, come over, I made fried eggs." Turning to see Molly and Ethan's food, she awkwardly said, "Molly, be a good girl and share some with your uncle, okay?" I ignored them and left the house. With only a few days until school started, I had already prepared the necessary paperwork. I planned to buy more books and stationery to donate to children in the mountains and see if there was anything else I needed to get. After finishing everything, I booked a room at a hotel. Though it was only 2 days, I couldn't stand seeing Victoria every day. Since she thought I was jealous of Ethan, I might as well let her think that and use it as an excuse to move out. Everything settled, I returned home to find Molly playing with my lesson plans. My head buzzed and I asked, "What are you doing?" grabbing them back. Molly was startled and fell off the table. Her screams brought Ethan rushing over from another room. "What are you doing? Who told you to bully Molly?" He pushed me and picked her up protectively. Shaking with anger, I carefully put the lesson plans in my bag and demanded, "I bullied her? Did you see what she did? Who told you to touch my things? Get out." Ethan stood up, holding Molly, and looked at me coldly. You haven't even married Victoria yet. You have no say here. Even if you did marry her, you wouldn't win against me." He walked to the door, paused, and added, "Even if you do marry her, you won't win against me." The door slammed shut. Ethan's hostility towards me was always apparent when Victoria wasn't around. I used to constantly retreat in the face of his aggression. Following Victoria, he had become quite capable, and everyone said they were the perfect team. Compared to him, I was just a house husband, much less impressive. But living again, I suddenly felt relieved. He might be excellent, but I have my own brilliance. Why should Ethan and I be placed on opposite sides of the scale? Victoria isn't worth it. Is there nothing else in my life besides her? I can go teach in underprivileged areas, bring new knowledge to the kids, and contribute to education. It may seem insignificant, but it's meaningful. I can broaden my horizons and gain new experiences. The mire here would only hold me back. As for Ethan, when I first returned, I had thought about exacting revenge. In my previous life, he had made my marriage a mere formality. I considered causing trouble at his workplace or exposing him online. But what good would that do? As long as Victoria wanted to, she had 100 ways to keep supporting him. Besides, if Victoria wasn't interested in him, he could stand naked in front of her, and she wouldn't look twice. What's the point? It's just a misguided love affair. I don't want to waste any more of my life dealing with it. So I firmly told Ethan, "Listen, whatever your relationship with Victoria is, whether you admit it or not, it's none of my business anymore. I won't marry her. If you understand, you should focus more on her and stop provoking me, or I might change my mind." Ethan was stunned and stammered. He wanted to deny it, but perhaps fearing to truly anger me, he finally returned to the room half-heartedly. I packed my things and took one last look at the apartment. It was filled with traces of other men having lived there. There was nothing worth lingering for. I turned and left. Back at the hotel, I began to pack and edit a message for Victoria. Although she had treated me poorly in many ways, we hadn't had any major grievances in this lifetime so far. We had wasted each other's time in our past lives, and in the end it was all vague and unclear. If possible, I wanted to clarify things this time around. In the message, I didn't mention my destination. I simply told her I was determined to go volunteer teaching. I said that since neither of us wanted the marriage, we should just call it off, and from now on, we should each find our own happiness. Before I could send the message, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Victoria standing outside. She was panting heavily as if she had been running for a long time. "I'm glad I found you. As long as you're okay," she said, catching her breath. I remained silent, expecting her to scold me as usual, but she softly said, "All right, don't be mad. Come back with me." Victoria pushed her way in and began to help pack my things. I turned off my phone screen, but her eyes fell on the numerous bags on the floor. Her face changed drastically, and she asked, "Where are you going?" I was taken aback and regretted not hiding my things better. I quickly said, "Molly was rummaging through my stuff this afternoon. I was afraid she might break something, so I brought it all out." Victoria visibly relaxed, seeing my natural expression. "I've already scolded her. Don't hold it against the child," she said. I went along with it and then held her hand as she tried to pack my luggage. Victoria frowned. "What's wrong? Still angry?" "Molly was wrong, but she's just a child. Don't make a fuss. I find it strange that she's normally well-behaved but always clashes with you when you're around." Victoria wanted to say more but stopped when she saw my indifferent look. "Does Ethan know you came to find me?" I asked. Victoria, a bit embarrassed, retorted, "What does he have to do with this? Why do you always bring up Ethan?" Ignoring her, I continued, "I guess he doesn't know. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing here. I'm your fiancé. It's only natural for you to come looking for me after a fight. But why do you subconsciously avoid mentioning me to him? Why do you always evade anything related to me in front of him? Every time we argue, you say it's because you're sisters and you take care of each other. But you have other sisters. Why are they not as important to you?" "Victoria," I called her softly. "If you don't love me, just let me go." Victoria's face changed drastically, and she seemed to stagger a bit. After a long pause, she said with difficulty, "If you're not coming back, stay here and reflect. I'll come for you in a few days." She left in a hurry, almost escaping. I never intended to disappoint you. I was going to prepare for the wedding upon my return. Listening to her stumbling footsteps fade away, I closed the door expressionlessly. It's ridiculous. It's as if her willingness to prepare for the wedding and marry me was a huge favor I should be eternally grateful for. After she left, I bought a train ticket on my phone and then went out for a meal with some close colleagues. Everyone was about to go their separate ways, and who knows when we'd see each other again. During the meal, the classmate I was closest to hesitated for a while. He knew a bit about me and Victoria and said, "Sincere, didn't you say you were getting married soon? Why are you going to volunteer teach in a remote area?" Long-distance relationships are tough for most couples. I smiled and shook my head. "The wedding's off." Then I raised my glass and said, "The world is so big. I want to see it. So, to youth, to friendship, to ourselves." I expected a sleepless night, but ended up sleeping soundly till dawn. Upon waking, I headed straight to the train station. Right before boarding, I sent the message I had edited for so long. My phone buzzed incessantly as soon as the message went out. I turned it off immediately. As the train started, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and I faintly saw my past self saying, "Thank you." When the train arrived and I stepped onto that vast, barren land, I suddenly felt like crying. The step I could never take in my previous life turned out to be so easy. I just had to want it. I composed myself and went to report to the school. I cherished the opportunity immensely, making the most of every moment. Besides eating and sleeping, I spent all my time either in the classroom or preparing lessons. During this busy time, I received 3 calls from Victoria. The first was a month into the semester. She had finally gotten my number after much effort. Seeing the unfamiliar number on the screen, I had already guessed it was her. Victoria was very emotional on the phone. She said she didn't agree to call off the wedding and that I had always been her husband in her heart. I hung up after half a minute. The second call came 2 months into the semester. Amidst the heavy snowfall, Victoria's tired voice came through. She said she had arranged housing and a job for Ethan, and had made it clear to him that they wouldn't see each other again. That day I listened quietly. The last call came on Christmas. Amidst the heavy snowfall, I spoke for the first time. I said, "Victoria, today is the final exam for the semester." The results came out, and all the kids in our class did excellently. At the start of the semester, I found teaching quite challenging. I had to adapt to the local dialect while giving lessons and visit each student's home. Things didn't go smoothly at first, and I faced many closed doors. I didn't know when I would earn the parents' trust. Victoria listened intently on the other end of the phone, her breathing soft. Finally I said, "But you know what, Victoria? I'm really happy now. I won't cage myself anymore." Victoria suddenly choked up, her weary voice breaking through. "But I miss you." See, her subject is always I. She never cared about my soul's outlet, even in moments of reconciliation. After the call ended, I sat at the mountain's base and cried my heart out. In a past life, no matter how hard it got, I was hysterical, filled with hatred and regret, but never shed a tear. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to cry. Once the tears dried, I started working even harder at teaching. In my second year of volunteering, the villagers began to trust me more and more. Wherever I went, they greeted me warmly. Although rural education still has a long way to go, just making progress means many children will benefit. Every late night when I lifted my head from the office desk and looked at the bright moon between the mountains, I felt an inexplicable drive supporting me. The feeling of fighting for a dream is truly wonderful. Later, I heard from a classmate that Victoria got married. Her partner was Ethan. My classmate spoke cautiously, perhaps considering my feelings, and explained that Victoria had been preparing to visit the place where I was teaching. After Ethan found out, he went to confront her. I didn't hear the details, but the next day they woke up in the same bed. Victoria stubbornly refused to agree, but she was pregnant. I was indifferent. In this life, she still entered marriage out of obligation, duty to her daughter, duty to her mother, but never duty as a wife. At the end of the conversation, my classmate suddenly sighed. "Back when you went to teach, I thought leaving Victoria was your loss. Now I realize a man will truly shine when he creates his own world. Sincere, we all admire you now." 5 years later, I finished my volunteer teaching, having nurtured a great number of outstanding children. The road to fulfilling dreams is long and challenging.